viewers, and welcome to Futsal868 Corner Talks. My name is Geoffrey Edwards, series moderator and president of the Futsal Association of Trinidad Tobago. With me is my co-host, Miss Sophia Sylvester. She is a Futsal868 Movement Committee member. Futsal868 Corner Talks is an online meetup series where global sporting professionals share their experiences and perspectives on the fastest growing indoor sport in the world, futsal. In recent sessions, we have expanded to discuss topics of social issues and their relation to sport. Our main objective is to sensitize and educate sports stakeholders on the sport of futsal and other pressing local and global issues. Like physical health, everyone has mental health and needs to look after it. With our differences as a people, we experience a variety of thoughts and feelings as part of our normal life, with each dealing with said differently based on temperamental, environmental, genetic, and physiological factors. Today is the first of a three-part series entitled Mental Health and Emotional Intelligence in Sport. In this episode, we focus on mental health. But before we introduce our panel, let's take a look at some startling facts. So to help us understand this topic, as you recognize from that introduction, it is a very complex but important topic. We have assembled a team from around the region, from around the world, I would say. Joining us from the United States of America is Ms. Ashley Hughes, Marketing and Sponsorship Manager at Behr Films. Good day, Ashley. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Gabriel Behr Andrade, and he is in China, where it is 5 a.m. Sports Psychologist. Thank you very much, Gabriel, for being a part of it.
Tokyo, actually. 5 a.m. in Tokyo. I'm not sure what time it is in China.
5 a.m. Tokyo. My apologies. 5 a.m. Tokyo. I probably need some coffee, not you. And last but not least, three-time Olympian, 200-meter silver medalist at the 1988 Seoul Olympics, and director of sport at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago. For Futsal Association of Trinidad and Tobago, this woman was responsible for getting us a facility, her facility, in preparation for the Olympics, the Youth Olympics in 2018, was the first time futsal was played at the Olympic movement. I call her Mama Grace. Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for being part of this.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here as well.
Of course. Ladies and gents, we go straight into it. Let's go straight into it. So my first question, and obviously ladies first, would be, what is mental health and why is it important in sport? So Ms. Jackson, we start with you and then we follow out with Ashley. What is mental health and why is it important to sport?
Well, you know, the topic of your talk today is about emotional intelligence. And I think that the concept of emotional intelligence speaks to your state of mind and how you work with that physical strength that you take to the field of play. And if you don't have a strong mind, the likelihood is that you will be in very good shape and you can do wonderful things, but you're not able to execute on the field when you are expected to. And so it really takes building the mental capacity while you're building the physical capacity in order to be able to be in the top of your sport. Like, many of the top athletes get there not just because they train hard, but because they understand that they need to have their state of mind in the same place where their physical positioning is. I, for one, learned meditation, which helped me significantly, just at the cusp of my career when I was about to rise. I understood, I was taught meditation, and it and be able to attack those 400 meters that I really didn't like to run. And that was really, I would say, a platform for me to be able to leap from as I went forward.
Ashley, it's interesting that Ms. Grace would have mentioned meditation, because you are a family to meditation. You are yoga. So just to answer the same question, how important is mental health to sports?
I'm so excited you said meditation, because as a trauma yoga instructor, I work with a lot of high-profile athletes on mind-body connection, and meditation is one of the formats that we use to get there. So for me, mental health is about emotional regulation and being able to either sit with or understand or shift feelings. So if we want to relate it to sport, we can think about, there's an athlete on pretty much every team who's got a temper. They're the ones who are getting red carded or thrown out. Those are not typically our leaders. Those are the ones who always get to the top and maintain this elite level all the time. And the athletes that are able to emotionally regulate or understand, like, I'm actually feeling really sad today. What can I do to take care of myself? Or I'm feeling really angry and agitated or anxious. What are the things that we can do either from a support system or the athlete can do to better take care of themselves so they can perform at the high level that they're trained to do and also expected to by so many different stakeholders. Right. So for me, sport has major stake in the mental well-being of all of the athletes that are involved, and the mental health of the athlete comes from being able to recognize what's going on with them, and then as well as their teammates or even their coaches and parents and vice versa. So it really just comes full circle. So really excited to talk about this today.
I am excited to have you here. So Gabriel, straight to you. As a sports psychologist, how does mental health affect athletic performance?
Oh, it affects it quite a lot. I mean, there's a lot of importance in the stability and the consistency that you have. And a lot of that comes on your state of mind. But most of it is the adaptation. Like, how do you adapt to different situations? And the first thing that needs to adapt when you're in different situations is your state of mind. I mean, if it starts raining a bit, you need to just not just change your tactics, but you also need to change your attitude towards it. And so in sport, it's really important. And also, we need to remember that sport always has two sides. You have the side that's on the field and the side that's off the field. And a lot of times, these two worlds are living together. And it's that need to separate them when you need to separate them. So when you step onto the field, you leave everything that's going on outside. And the same thing as well, any frustrations that you have on the field, leave that on the field and don't take it off with you. So it's living with these two worlds that are always interacting with each other, but also being able to separate them at the same time. So those are the things that you need to work on your head and how to adjust and adapt as you go by.
It's interesting you mentioned as regards to, it somewhat sounds like it's two personalities, which we'll deal with in another segment when it comes to athletic identity. But Sophia, you have a question to our panel.
Your mic isn't on.
Okay, Sophia, sorry, go ahead.
Your mic.
Okay, so I said that I would ask as I see them on my screen. So Ashley, you're first. What are your personal and professional sporting experiences when it comes to mental health?
Mine personally? I'm echoing. So for me personally, I have post-traumatic stress, which has come with serious symptoms of suicidality, depression, and anxiety. So when I work with athletes now, there's a personal connection there. And when we work with athletes here in Breckenridge, Colorado is unfortunately located in what's called the suicide belt in the United States. So we have 30% less oxygen in the air, which is contributory to some of the mental health challenges up here as well. But we also have an incredible amount of risk with athletes here. So we have avalanches, we have high impact crashes all the time from skiing and snowboarding, mountain biking, really intense sports. And you see that people in this close-knit community lose friends every season. So when I work with athletes, which is kind of a privilege, I hear that they have emotional trauma from losing a friend in an accident, in an avalanche in the backcountry in February, or I hear that this athlete has just suffered their 6th ACL tear, which is the ending of their career eventually. So for me, when I personally work with them, it's like trying to figure out what's really triggering the biggest challenge in their life right now and the kind of emotions they're experiencing, and then understanding where in their body they're experiencing those. So when they start to sort of physically feel an emotion coming on, you can connect your mind and body, identify it, and then take those coping mechanisms where you need to, and ultimately start to establish a really solid self-care protocol for yourself or for anyone really. I also work with a lot of parents of athletes as well as coaches of athletes to help identify within some of the younger athletes that are up here. Like we've got 12-year-olds that are sending it like 20 feet up half pipes, and then they're expected to go to school and perform at the same level that they're performing in a potentially pre-Olympic lifestyle. So helping parents recognize signs and symptoms of challenges that they could be facing is a big part of what I work with. And then also stigma reduction. In the last 3 years, I have seen a dramatic shift in how we talk about anxiety and depression, trauma in sports. And I think we're moving in the correct direction. It's great to see people who are talking about it and being less ashamed that it's happening, because it is really common. And I find that if we're able to talk about it more and we're authentic with ourselves, like I did not talk about what happened to me for a very long time, and that was bad. So being able to share that and create a sense of connection and community, which ultimately supports other people, is really what elevates athletes moving forward as well. So my personal experience comes from my personal story and background, having gone through a lot of the severity of post-traumatic stress and the impact of it, and then being able to work with athletes to support them, because ultimately I feel there's so much power in sport, but if we're not supporting our athletes full circle from their physical, mental, and emotional health, sport can't perform at the level we need it to.
Okay, I really like the fact that you would take your personal experience and allow it to be a platform for you to connect to athletes better. You know, some persons just want to understand, just want to know that somebody could connect with me and not coming from a place of ignorance. I really like that. Miss Jackson, what about you? What's your personal and professional experience when it comes to mental health? Miss Jackson.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't sure. Oh, well, when I started out, I was just, a jumper and then a runner, and, learned to train hard and participate. But at some point in time, when you run and you lose so many races, you become a little bit hesitant. And that would have happened to me fairly early in my international journey. And I had to learn coping mechanisms, learning, how to respond when you're not winning, although you're training hard, which is really a major thing for us in track and field. You put in a lot of hours, you train really hard. And then when you go to perform, you think you're ready and you don't do what is expected of you, what you expect of yourself and what others expect of you. And that becomes a challenge. And so I definitely had to identify, why was it that I got so nervous when I had to go to the starting line? I had already done the work. And as I mentioned earlier, I think meditation was one of the ways that helped me to keep a calm spirit before I warmed up. So therefore, I wouldn't have gone in as nervous in approaching my races. It made a significant difference. It made a difference even in how I approached my training sessions and my approach to doing very hard workouts. I was able to change. It was like a real transformation. It gave you a sense of calm and direction that helped to really balance those negative thoughts. I wouldn't say balance them. I would say push them away, because what happened is that I became such a positive person that I couldn't think negative about my races anymore. I always thought, the most positive things that I could when I went out there to race. And it was an advantage, of course, for me because I behaved that way. I behaved like I was in charge and in command. And because of that, I also transferred to my competitors a sense of nervousness to them because they would wonder many a times why, I felt like I was going to win. And I did many a times when I wasn't expected to. So the question of being emotionally stable to support what you're doing physically is absolutely extremely important. In the Caribbean, and particularly in Jamaica, where I am from, one of the things that I think our associations and people really didn't like, including the athletes, is the whole question of working with a sports psychologist. Because the thought process is that, oh, well, if you have to go and work with a psychologist, you're mad. And nobody wants to be seen as being mad. I think we could have had, even though we've had great performances, I think if persons were to have shed that and worked with the professionals to help them, I think that their performances would have been so much better because they had actually put in the work to be able to perform well, but they needed that little extra to be able to mix the mental strategy with the physical strategy to be continuously in the front of their game. So that was my experience as a youngster.
First, before I even go on to Gabriel, because you mentioned as regards to working with the person who some people might deem as mad. So, Gabriel, my question to you is, from a professional standpoint as a sports psychologist, how do you get athletes to work with you? And Mama Grace, I now see where Usain Bolt gets his intimidating manner from. I think it taught him a few things, a point or two. But so, Gabriel, how do we get to work with the mad one? Am I to call you the mad one from henceforth?
No, the thing is, it's not that I'm the mad one, and like Ms. Jackson said, there is that stigma, and I've seen that before firsthand. I remember I was introduced to a team, and the coach said, "Look, this is the Gabriel who'll be the sports psychologist," and one player literally stood up and said, "Why do you think we're crazy?" There was this real stigma. This was maybe almost 15 years ago in Brazil, and there was a massive stigma, not just there, but in other countries, of if you're working with a sports psychologist, you're considered to be crazy. Now, the interesting thing was that this athlete was quite aggressive towards the idea, but once I started working with him, he actually started seeing me in hiding. Basically, he would send me a message, be like, "Look, I want to talk to you, but don't tell the other guys." And I used to see a lot of that. A lot of people weren't open to admitting that they wanted to see a sports psychologist. And all it really was them wanting to improve their performance. So it wasn't that they were delving into depression and any suicidal ideations or any real serious mental issues. It really was the mental side of sport. But because the word psychologist is associated with a lot of different other things, they do create that stigma. So we do group work together, but then individually, some of them would see me openly. They were quite comfortable with it, but other ones would actually, try to hide the fact that we're seeing a psychologist, although they did see the benefit. So for a long time, it was quite tricky. So I found it very interesting that Ashley used the word stigma. And the same thing that Ms. Jackson said, that some people thought that people were mad working with psychologists, because for a very long time, there has been that stigma, because we've created this mythology around athletes, that athletes are the toughest people around, which a lot of times they are, but they're not indestructible. Athletes are people like everybody else. And we need to remember that. We can't put them in this pedestal of being superheroes when they're as fragile as any other person, because in the end of the day, we're all people. But to answer your question, it's getting easier now. to work with athletes, because they do understand that the psychology is a benefit to their sport, and it has nothing really to do with them being crazy or not. I mean, even in general, clinical psychology, it's got nothing to do with that. It's about finding your stability and being able to adapt and adjust, and having someone to help you with the adaptations that you need on day-to-day living.
As we take our first break, we want our viewers to understand, as Gabriel says, even elite athletes are not all supermen and women. So let's take a quick look and get the views of elite athletes when it comes to mental health, as seen through The Guardian. We'll be right back.
I want to share my story so I can help.
Understand that it's okay to not be okay.
It's time to talk. It's time to change.
When I played football, that was my language. That's how I communicated. And when that was taken away from me, I just felt like I was nothing. I was no one.
You know, you got so much responsibility as an athlete to your team. You know, you got to play at a certain level, and your teammates counting on you. You got the pressure from the media.
You know, when you experience the highs, and obviously you're going to experience the lows, and it's coping with the lows that is the most difficult part.
When, you know, I got into my state, it hit me like a brick.
Was that because
I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want anyone to think differently of me.
When I was playing rugby, my feet were not planted deep, they were shallow. Anything was knocking me around, and I felt like it was a balancing act. I had to fight against this, fight against this, fight against this, and hold on and survive, and win a game, and it was just, thank God for that, let's move on.
Yeah. I suffer from depression. Depression is with me on a daily basis. It is time for sport to accept its responsibility with this issue.
There's records, there's numbers that I'm really close to, and of course I feel pressure, but I will play, I will fight, and I will keep going on.
And my thoughts of wanting to take my life, they don't define me, and they will never define me, and they'll never win.
Struggles are going to happen in life. You know, you're going to get punched in the mouth at some point, but understand that you can get back up, dust yourself off, and get back out there.
And everybody's going through something, and everybody, has things that you can't see, you can't touch, that, they're walking around with every day.
If your eyes hurt, you go to the opticians. If your head's hurt, you go and see someone about mental health. It'd be nice just to let it out rather than keeping it in. Because the more you keep it in, the more you explode.
I don't know why I opened up and talked about it, but I guess I was just sick and tired of just having it inside of me for 20 plus years, and I was ready to make a change.
I'm glad I got through it.
So to those who are joining us, welcome back to the Futsal 868 Corner Talks. We are speaking mental health and emotional intelligence in sport. And what you just saw was the fact that a lot of elite athletes, men and women who we look up to, who we see on a daily basis, except during the COVID period, unless Michael Jordan, we have seen that they also go through mental health. They are not supermen and superwomen as Gabriel said before the break. So with that being said, Sophia, your question to Ashley. Sophia, are you there? Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So you would have said that you deal with yoga and PTSD and trauma. So we could term that as a trauma-informed yoga instructor. This is the first time I'm hearing about it, so I wouldn't know that there are other people. This is their first time. So what do you do? What is a trauma-informed yoga instructor?
Sure. So I'm glad that Kevin Love was in part of that little montage because one, I'm from Cleveland, so go Cavs forever. And two, Kevin Love said that people are always going through something and you can't see it. So I actually did my outpatient treatment through Cleveland Clinic. I was in there for like 4 months in and out with support from multiple psychologists and different counselors, and just wanted to learn everything about how I could heal my brain more or less post-trauma. And one of my counselors said, Ashley, you have this like upper hand, if you will, because you're a yoga instructor. You understand the concept of mind and body connection. And when we have a challenge in life, whether it's defined as traumatic or not by you or someone else, it causes this huge disconnect between your mind and body. So what we mean by that is if you think of something that like kind of grosses you out, like for me, I think of this like enormous beetle in a gas station when I moved to Virginia for college. And it was, I kid you not, it was like this big. And to this day, if I think about that, I immediately like tense up. This is what my hands do. And my shoulders go up to my ears. So that is the body storing an experience or a story. And there's this really amazing book, if you want to know more, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's about how our bodies remember challenging experiences and we hold that somewhere. It needs to be released. So what happens a lot with trauma is the mind and body disconnect. So perhaps, for example, right now I'm looking at the mountains. It's beautiful. But when I was going through trauma, I would look at the mountains and feel absolute sadness, severe depression. Like, why doesn't this make me happy? What's wrong with me? So we had to work on identifying like why I was feeling that way. So when we talk about trauma-informed yoga, what we're working with is specific postures that you can do in yoga, specific breathing techniques that can help stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your brain that tells your body to rest and digest and get out of survival mode. A lot of times when we're used to performing at this elite level, we're functioning with hypervigilance, which is when the body is like engaged and alert and more so high alert that something might happen. So in trauma-informed yoga, I'll teach you like, it's called pranayama breathing, inhales and exhales through the nose, which ultimately calms the nervous system. It stops the increase in cortisol, which is the hormone that helps in fight or flight stimulus, which kind of like brings you back so you can make rational decisions and understand what's going on around you. So if you think of a high pressure situation for an athlete and their heart rate's like already at 180, their body's producing a ton of stress hormones, we teach them to bring it back, focus on the task at hand, and go forward. Additionally, there's certain postures that we work with that help you kind of either feel more grounded. So anxiety is oftentimes about freaking out about the future. It's all of these like, what if this happens? What if X happens? What if I don't do this? What if I had trained harder? Wow, is that exhausting? Like that is so terrifying. And like your body's so agitated all the time. So those deep inhales and exhales through your nose bring you back down. Or just identifying that that's what your body's doing. You take a standing posture, you feel connected to something around you, and you all of a sudden are back in the present moment, which is a lot easier to manage than like what all of these what if scenarios. When it comes to like depression and we're feeling quite sad, what can we do to feel energized? So there's a posture called star pose where it's like power pose, your arms go way out, you close your eyes and you just envision yourself feeling good and happy. Or just better accomplished, or you tap into a memory. It's called the safe, calm place in psychology and yoga most of the time. And you tap into an experience where you felt empowered or strong. And a lot of it in trauma-informed yoga is helping people not just identify how they're feeling in their body so they can choose a coping mechanism that works for them, or doing a posture to sit through an emotion, but also just identifying, lost my train of thought a little bit there. Also just how they can like move forward and just feel better, and then also talk about what the heck is going on with them, because there's just so much going on all the time. And then I think it's really important, like up here, trauma is defined differently by everyone, and I think it's really important, like from what happened to me, most people would identify that as trauma, but what may be trauma to me may not be trauma to you. So like if a teammate loses a friend during the middle of playoffs, it's going to impact how they function as an athlete. If a parent of an athlete is going through something and that child is watching it constantly, that could be traumatic for them. So it's really important as in my job to be informed as to what kind of trauma experiences people have and then respecting that. So ultimately for me, it's all about creating a mind-body experience and helping people kind of return to the self that they recognize to perform at their elite levels.
That's very interesting. And one of our viewers, Mr. Richard Goddard, says Ashley is correct. We do forget at times the mind and body do work together to assist in the healing process. Thank you very much, Richard, for contributing to the conversation. Mama Grace, COVID-19 has affected global sports. I mean, this has now become every sports reporter is speaking about it, right? So my question to you is, if this was 1988, the year of the Olympics, 1988, where you won silver medal in Seoul, it was cancelled to 1989, how would you have been affected mentally? And what advice would you give to your present-day athletes to cope with this delay?
Well, if that was to happen in 1988, I was, I think, at the height of my mental state of mind. I had understood how to manage disappointment, and I had been working on that. Every day in 1988, I got up every morning and I ran for 20 minutes. And I thought of my competitors, and I thought of the things that I was going to be able to do to resolve it. In the midst of that year, there was an earthquake, my first earthquake in Los Angeles. I think it was either 6.1 or 7.1. Hadn't a clue, saw it, made sure that everything was okay, went out and continued that run. That was one thing. Another thing that happened to me in 88 was that on my way to Europe, just, clearing my mailbox, going back home to pick up my bags to go to the airport, someone ran a red light, hit the car, spun around, and the only thing I could think was I touched to see if my legs were still intact.
Wow.
I continued down, went to the doctor on the way to the airport, sat on the plane, had a little bit of whiplash, got to Europe, and went out there and continued to perform as I expected to. I ran really well in the first meet, which was Lausanne. And so it was just a different year for me. I was ready physically and I was ready mentally. Anything that could go wrong, I decided I was going to be rising above it. So when I think about that and I think about what's happening this year, I look, I'm from Jamaica, and we Jamaicans, hardship is just like a way of life. And so we know how to take on those challenges and really move with it. The athletes are training in Jamaica. They haven't allowed COVID to stop them from doing what they need to do. This is their job. They understand that they need to be back on the track. They're actually running in meets in Jamaica. They are having meets that these athletes are getting an opportunity to run and test where they are. So while it's a stumbling block, it's not an end. And so the stumbling block means that you stumble, you get up and it's the only way to do it. You can't sit down. What are you going to do? Worry about COVID? You have no control of it. So the things that you have no control of, what you do, you take in hand what you have control of, and you have control of yourself. You can have control of your destiny, how you are going to approach your destiny. And so that's what these athletes are doing. So you have to develop a strong mind. And I think as a Jamaican, I say that, people see us as aggressive, but it is that aggressiveness that allows us to rise to the top and see the challenges, take it on, and go beyond them in order to be the best. In whatever we do, not just in sport, in whatever we do, we take on these challenges because it is a part of us. We grow up in less privileged situations, most of us. And so, what do? You don't sit back and talk about it. You get up and you rise and you say, how am I going to do that? You might fall, but you get back up again. And that really deals with your state of mind and your desire to say, I want to reach that finish line. And even when you're down, and again, I'm going to give an example of a situation that I had in 1988. I think it was in Nice. I was really miserable, and I don't think anybody wanted to be around me on that particular day. I had a 400 to run, which I don't like running 400, but I understood what it did for me for my 200 and my 100. And that day I went out there very miserable. I probably cursed off one or two people in the dining room, but they just laughed at me because they knew I didn't like the 400. I got on the track, and because I was focusing on whether or not I should have been running that 400, it took my mind about being nervous for running this 400. And I just took off like everybody else. And I'm like, wait, I'm with them at the 100. And then I'm going, wow, I'm not too far behind at the 200. And I just realized I had a whole lot left in me, and I started to run. that was when I ran my first race under 50 seconds. I ran 49:57, which became the Jamaican record. It lasted for a while, at least until the next, I think, Olympics or so, before it was broken. No, this is a race that I was generally very terrified of running, but I was able to overcome that fear, maybe because I was redirected on that day. And then I became a believer that I could act 49 seconds and then repeated it. So it really is what happens with your mind and how you activate that mind and use it in a way in which it's going to push you forward. And so when I look at Shelley and Fraser, I have to bring her, in the conversation, because I've been looking at the times that she's running now races in Jamaica. And, look at her height. One would say, oh, well, she's so short. Others with longer legs will pass her. No, she maximizes the use of her body, and she uses her mind, most importantly, to help her to be able to do both things, so that she has been able to achieve, these medals. She's been winning these races, and it really started simply in a high school, when she was still in high school, in a race in Jamaica, when someone else was going to win, and she clearly just closed her eyes, or she opened it wide, whichever one, and went through. That was her state of mind, and it never left her. And so that is what the asset to an athlete being successful, that emotional intelligence, is what you need to have to be able to move to the top.
Before I continue, I must say happy belated independence to my second home, Jamaica.
Yes.
Thank you. Of course, we also have to recognize another great point from one of our viewers as regards to what Mr. Jackson was speaking about when it comes to the attitude of perseverance and resilience. So to my co-host, you're up next, darling. Speak to the people. You have to unmute your mic. Sophia. That's all right.
I'm sorry about that. As we know, athletes are not immune to any deterioration or any hindrances they might experience with mental health. Now, when COVID came, around the world, many athletes were unable to train. Some had the innovation to. There was one person who ran an entire. There was one person who ran an entire marathon on their balcony.
Yeah.
So for those of us who weren't so, and Grace said in Jamaica they were still training, and in Trinidad there was 0 to nothing. So to Gabriel, how does COVID-19 and self-isolation affect the mental health and the mental state of amateur and elite athletes?
Well, there's a lot that's going on here, and one thing that Grace said, which I thought was very poignant, was about control and that sense of control and what can you control. And one very important thing here is to control the controllables. Like, what can you actually control? The whole COVID situation is something that we can't control. Like right now, I'm working in the organizing committee of the Olympic Games. And it was nothing we could do. We had to postpone it. We couldn't control the virus. It was something that was beyond us. And that's something that the athletes need to start getting to grips with is what can we actually control. Now, for that, it's very important that sometimes they're going through the different stages of grief. I use this more as an example, and I'll explain to you why. But when we talk about grief, we talk about loss, like when you lose someone, when you lose a limb, when you lose an opportunity or lose a job. And there's a classic 5 stages, which they say is anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, one thing I don't really like with this model is the acceptance part of it, because right now, like, we can't just sit back and accept the fact that COVID exists. We can't go to training, and we can't compete. What we have to do instead of just accept it is adapt to it, is adjust to it. And that's the key thing really of how we're going to do this adaptation and adjustment. There was this really great sports psychologist, Ken Ravizza. Fortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, because I'd be really interested in seeing what he would have to say about this. Because one thing he would always say in terms of sport itself was, you need to learn how to have a good crappy day. Because not every day is going to be good. You're not going to go into every single competition feeling that you're great, feeling that you're 100%. You sometimes go in and you need to perform and you're at 50%. So how do you like adjust yourself like mentally to have a good crappy day? You know you're not 100%, but how do you use what you have to the best of your ability? And the way I see it now, we need to extend that. It's not just how do you have a good crappy day, but now unfortunately with COVID is how do you have a good crappy year? It's like, how do you make the best out of the situation that we're in? What are the adjustments that you need to do with your training? If you can't go outside, work more on your mental game, read more biographies of other athletes, like learn other skills, adjust to different things. So I think to me, it is affecting athletes quite a lot. And really, I think what we're going to see in the next year, the athletes that are going to come out like faster are the ones that really have adjusted, have better coping mechanisms of adjustment to their current situation.
And staying with you, Gabriel, is enough being done on the level of local, national, and international sporting organizations and federations to help athletes deal with their mental health? And I'm speaking directly to you from the event manager, event organizer standpoint. What are your thoughts as regards to what is or what is not being done? Is it enough?
Well, they are doing more. It's a very difficult question because every single country deals with it differently. Every single country has different ideas of mental health, and every different country has different capacities. Because the thing we need to be careful of here as well is a distinction between clinical and sports psychologist. I mean, right now with COVID, we're in this very tricky point, because a lot of athletes would need the sports psychology aspect of it to help maintain and grow their training. But a lot of them will need the clinical side of it as well, because they're going through a lot of things like that the general population is going through in terms of anxiety, depression due to COVID. So we need to be very careful on which support we're giving and when. I would always say more support is better. But it's difficult for me to say now if it's enough or not, because it really depends on the different country. But what I can say is this: there probably isn't enough, because everybody is in this situation. So it's very difficult to give that support to absolutely everybody, because it needs to be just not just the top athletes, but everybody needs support at this point while we're going through this COVID situation.
Mama Grace, that question to you as you sit as the director of sport at the University of West Sydney's St. Augustine campus, and having come also from our second home, well, my second home, your first home in terms of Mona campus, Jamaica, are there policies, regulations in place as regards to mental health to deal with in terms of athletes and also coaches?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you asked me that question, because when I started at the Mona campus, there was a young student who came in and said that she was interested in applied psychology, but she wanted to do some work with sports. I said, why not sports psychology? And, she kind of thought about it, but she started working with the track athlete. Dr. Olivia is now a trained sports psychologist, but she also deals with the clinical side as well. And the truth of the matter is that I think she made a difference even during the period of time that she was doing it on the Mona campus with the athletes. And you are amazed to see the kind of help that these athletes need in terms of their mental state. And it's not just during competition, it's actually outside of competition as well. Because there are so many other issues, as you heard Gabriel just said, that's going on that they need to be there. So I think that we were fortunate at the Mona campus during that period of time when Dr. Rose was there assisting. It was her process, but it was also the process of the students. But what I think is absent now, it's that the lack of role like that Dr. Rose plays really should be the person that's now working within the context of let us talk to our students, let us talk to our sports students. How often are they meeting? The national associations, this is what they're supposed to be looking at, the persons who can help with the mental health aspect of these persons who represents the country, because the truth of the matter is that they get the glory at the end. The presidents like to claim the glory when the athletes get the medals, right? They think that their administration is the one that has allowed these athletes to get the medal. But you have to think about all the other persons that are in between. What is the role of national federations? What is the role of, in Jamaican situation, it would be the clubs plus the tertiary level institution. What is their contribution to mental wellness of these persons that are going to everybody else, but at the end of the day, they go off and they represent the people, the people of the country, the people of this university, the people of the clubs. And so they have to pay attention to that. I think the truth of the matter within our region is that there's not a clear connection with our sports administrators and the need for that mental support for our athletes, because we tend to say, oh, they just need to get themselves together. Oh, that one is just spoiled. And they find all these different reasons to give about these athletes because they do not connect at all. And that would be a transformation that I would love to see. There should be a sports psychologist on all of it. We need that person that is connected to give the support to the performance of these athletes, because they are training, they're getting that from the coaches, but we do not have that as much. And I'm going to turn to my new adopted country of Trinidad and Tobago. You have a people who are very laid back, and sport is that other thing, but you have a people that have really good talent, and they are not engaging the talent in a way because they do not necessarily understand it. They like the success, but they are not engaging it in a way in which you can apply that mental help to get that physical help, the physical that is there, to strengthen that physical, to make them have more persons operating at a higher level. And it has to do with the culture.
Thank you very much, Mama Grace, as regards to that. And
really break, because they break the culture.
You hear me, Mama Grace? You was breaking in and out. Sorry about that if I interrupt you.
Oh. Yeah, no, I'm finished, yes.
Oh, sorry about that, Mama Grace. You're breaking in and out. And we have been having some peculiar weather recently as regards the ITCZ. To strip quickly to Ashley, power and control. What are your interpretations as regards to that? Walk us through your thoughts to those two interesting words, power and control.
Sure. So I think power and control are two words that are often used interchangeably, but actually have very different definitions. And one can contribute to anxiety and one can contribute to more self-empowerment and a bit better mental health tactics. So control implies that we actually can change an outcome, that if I want COVID to end, I can somehow make it end. Power implies that I can do everything in my power and have to respect whatever the outcome is. I can't actually choose that. So we can play with the word fate if we want to, because ultimately, like, you can train every single day, all day, eat perfectly, sleep 8.5 hours a day, never go on Instagram, have only positive interactions in your life, and still come in third at the Olympics. That would be control if you did all of those things perfectly and always took first, and you can control the outcome. So when we have challenging circumstances, 5 things that are basic human needs are usually compromised. So it's power, safety, confidence, trust, and intimacy. And when we say intimacy, I don't mean sexual intimacy. I mean like knowing who we are. Because a lot of times if you train all the time and you get that specific outcome 9 out of 10 times, and then it doesn't happen, that is a shock to your system. So it's about looking at what power do I have in this situation to regain that sense of self. So it could be as like the basic starters of, I have the power to eat healthy during a global pandemic. I have the power to sleep 8 hours and actually turn Instagram off at 11 p.m. and shut it down, get my good rest. I have the power to have positive interactions and turn off the noise of people who are negatively impacting my emotions. I do not have the power to change the dates the Olympics start. I do not have the power as an athlete to be like, this is all going to end and it's going to be great and I'm going to take gold. We just don't have that. So I think it's really important to it's that letting go sensation, let go of control and understand you have power to influence something, but not the power to control an outcome, if that makes sense. For me and a lot of my athletes, it helps with anxiety to be like, I actually can't do this, but I'm going to do my best.
It's that you mentioned power and control, because there's one professional athlete that we're going to show a graphic of who totally lost both power and control. And this is a quote from Mr. Aaron Lennon when he spoke as regards to, as a footballer, I knew how to look after my physical health, but that was all. I didn't know what to do about my mental well-being. I didn't really know who to turn to when I started to feel low. And that's why the situation got to where it did. And it's very interesting because he was found in a out of body experience, as he calls it, somewhere in England, and they took him under the Mental Health Act to be able to treat with him. So I totally agree with you as regards to that whole concept of power and control. To all panelists, from our introduction, we saw there's a stigma and discrimination associated with mental health. Is this prevalent in your region of operation? Also, how can local, national, and international sporting organizations and federations deal with stigma and discrimination as it pertains to mental health? And I will start with Gabriel first, then we move on to Mama Grace and end with Ashley as regards to that same question. So Gabriel?
Yeah, like I was saying, for a long time, we created this image of athletes, and it goes back to like the days of gladiators, where they're like, it was this do or die attitude that these gladiators would go into the arena, and they'd fight to the death, and that's how tough they were. There's a big problem with this mythology, though, is gladiators actually didn't fight to the death. Gladiators were actually quite difficult to train, quite expensive to train. And they were superstars of their days. They were posters of these gladiators around Rome. So they were like the athletes of those days. But we create this mythology that it was like you have to be this tough to be doing it. And then this stayed in with us for sports for a very, very long time, that you had to have this very tough exterior. And people think that, athletes can handle the heckling and the boos and, they get paid enough to do this, when it's just not true. But it's good to know that like the times are changing and coaching is changing and the attitudes are changing, that we don't have this cookie cutter approach of coaching anymore, where coaches just think you yell at the athlete and they'll get motivated to compete. So people are really adjusting to this. But one of the big problems now is that we also have it's so much easier to be accessible to the athletes with social media and things like that. So you have to be an athlete now 24/7. You can't just turn it off. And it's becoming a bit more difficult. But with so many high-profile athletes coming out speaking of the issues that they've had in mental health, it is really, we are starting to fight the stigma. It's starting to become more recognized, not just in sport, but also in general well-being. For a long time, going to a clinical psychologist was a sign of weakness, not a sign of I'm trying to get help, I'm trying to improve myself. So that's something that is really changing. Again, not just in sport, but just in general, is that distinction that looking for help, looking for a psychologist is a way for you to improve yourself, for you to help yourself and the people around you, and not a sign of weakness. And that's a very big distinction that is starting to be made. You're looking for that for an improvement, not that you're weak, but because you have a chance to improve yourself.
To Mama Grace, your response?
Gabriel, I think that the signs of what you've just said, this is why we are actually talking about this emotional intelligence, because we have now moved. We've now moved from where we were to another place. And that's what's going to be able to help us in the Caribbean. For those who have the stigma, the national associations who thinks that the athletes just need to get over it. They themselves just need to be getting over it as well. And we can see it's happening in some sports because they do actually, as a Caribbean people, we're actually having sports psychologists on the teams. And I think that what the teams really need to be doing is identifying that could help them and ensure that they're working with the various sports within the country, particularly those who are training at a national level for, to make these national teams, but also to be able to travel with these teams so that they can help to impact this change. And also the change is not just for the persons that they're working with, but the young ones who join the team that are looking on, that, don't actually carry that stigma that, okay, I'm not mad, so I don't have to do that. But understanding how just a sort of, it's maybe just counseling. I mean, we as ordinary people actually do like to go and get mental therapy from time to time as we go along our journey. And if we are able to impart that to the athletes, and if they start to have that contact, you will see a world of a difference in their response, but you'll also see a world of a difference in their performance, because then they know they have somewhere they can do to be able to talk about the challenges that they're feeling mentally, and to be able to get some sort of directive as to how to deal with it.
Thank you very much, Mama Grace. Last but not least, Ashley.
Oh man, there's so much that we can do at all these levels to improve and benefit mental health, especially in sports. I think one of the things, I'm so glad that Grace said this, is the comment, get over it. That's just got to go. One is a lot of changing our language around how we talk about mental health. When I did the Cleveland Clinic's program, they continued to call it mental illness everywhere I went, which made me feel bad. So rather than talk about it in like negative terms and make people feel bad about it, talking about it positively and normalizing the concepts that someone's going through something can be huge, just by saying, like, you're going through something, can I empathize that? Teaching the difference between sympathy and empathizing. How do you draw on empathy? You do not have to have the same traumatic experience that I did to empathize with how I'm feeling. It's just a matter of that emotional intelligence of where you can draw on an experience to understand what I'm going through and potentially offer a relatable level of support. Additionally, I think one of the things I'm stoked on in terms of the football world is that at least in the Premier League at the elite academy levels, they have to have a sports psychologist for those children. Otherwise, they're not going to compete at the elite level. They're not going to Man U or Man City. They will stay in like level 1, level 2. That's just how it is. And I think that's incredible that if that people are recognizing if you want to be elite, you need to give the best services possible, starting at a young age. Because I think a lot of kids don't recognize, like, it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry. It's normal if you lose a game to be upset and want to look at like what could have gone better and how we can improve. But there's a difference in that language, once again, of, okay, I played poorly today. That doesn't make me a bad athlete overall. It means that I played poorly today. What can I do to feel better next time? And allow that movement forward and that development and growth rather than harping on one experience. So it allows the athlete to really grow. Another thing that I think is really important is good PR. So having athletes like Kevin Love, Michael Phelps, Serena Williams, openly talking about these challenges, people that a lot of kids look up to, that parents are willing to listen to, that have the credibility to say like, hi, I'm an elite athlete and I've won Wimbledon 24 times, but also have had these challenges, really reduces the stigma. And then on a really important front, also offering really good therapists. It took me 7 therapists until I found one that really helped me do what we like to call in the United States, do the work, which is different for everybody. But I also think it's really important that the support that we're providing is accessible and actually does benefit each athlete individually. And one of the things that's come out, especially during coronavirus, is telehealth. So I see 2 therapists. The one that I usually see is online in the access of my own living room at my convenience in a personal space where I don't have to feel threatened or embarrassed that someone could hear me. So I think those basic concepts of accessibility, affordability, and like better language around how we talk about mental health can really be beneficial at all the levels from local to international.
Absolutely.
You see that Mama Grace is clapping.
Yes, it's very true.
Actually, it's very difficult to get Mama Grace to clap. So
absolutely.
Consider you did a great job. Sophia, your question?
So to the entire panel, like all of you would work in the you all would have been in the field of sport, work with the field of sport. So how would you all deal with prima donnas, and what advice would you give to parents, the teammates, the coaches of these super gifted athletes?
Well, what's your definition of a prima donna, first of all?
A prima donna would be one of those athletes who they shine, like from the time they start, you watching them and you're like, yeah, that's something to look out for there. And they of themselves, they would know that I am something to look out for. I'm a star. Don't miss me.
If I may jump in, I will look at it from the namer standpoint of Freddie Adu. We in the Caribbean have a serious problem where we have secondary schools football league. Also in Jamaica, where we have young athletes who are 14, 15, and they do well, especially when it comes to football. They do extremely well on the football field in their country. But when it comes to outside of it, they're not mentally prepared. How do we deal with that? And I mentioned the unsuccessful Freddie Adu, but I also mentioned the successful Neymar, looking at him from 13, 14, 15.
Well, I think if I can jump in on this one, the two are quite linked, and it's something that we've changed, that has changed a lot, and something that Ashley mentioned in terms of support. A lot of times, a few years ago, if there was a talented athlete, they would just throw them at the new team, and there was very little support, especially an athlete coming from the Caribbean, coming from Brazil, from Argentina, going to Europe, where they don't really know anybody. They're young, they might not know the language. There was very little support, not just psychologically in terms of mental health, but just socially, helping out on the day-to-day. And a lot of these athletes would crash and burn. Neymar is actually a good example because he ended up staying in Brazil longer than he had to at the beginning of his days as an athlete. A lot of teams were offering him and the clubs he was playing with money for him to go to Europe, but they hesitated for a long time because they knew the importance of him being able to grow locally before he went out there. So that support needs to be also a general support of psychologically, physically, socially, culturally as well. A lot of athletes end up having a cultural clashes when they get to different countries if they don't know how to adjust appropriately to that. So again, it also has to do with the whole prima donna and how much pressure you put in. For example, Neymar to this day still has so much pressure put on him. If Brazil's going to go play an important game, a lot of times it's not how will Brazil win. It's how is Neymar gonna do this. And you see Messi, for example, he decided to not play for the national team a couple of times. He's come back since and played again with the national team because there was so much pressure on him as an individual. But football's a team sport. So how can like the media and the fans put so much pressure on one person? So it's really important that people understand that there's a lot of pressure that these athletes are into. And that's another thing that the culture needs to change. The culture of sport needs to change the amount of pressure that is put on these athletes as individuals, especially on the media side.
Mama Grace, your answer?
Okay. No, I think, again, I'm going to probably a little bit of repetition. The prima donnas, it's a name that people give to these athletes that make them believe that they're larger than life. Because yes, they're talented, but they're talented for where they are standing now in the region, or but if you match them, with the rest of the world, there's other talent just like that. And so the prima donna comes in from the external part and what people say, including their families and how they're treated. And they're separated in a way in which they really believe that, they're just caught up in that. So I think it really needs to happen. And that's why this whole question of emotional intelligence is that the talent is there. My son is talented and he's confident. I'm not going to see him as a prima donna. I'm going to see him as somebody that will work hard because he wants to be the best. He wants to be successful. So it will be important for me to be able to channel him in a direction in which that will be so. So what it is, you apply the necessary assistance, which means that you have to apply the mental assistance, because the physical assistance is already there, because the coaches are there, managers are there, everybody is ready to make the money because they say, yes, this is a good one. But it's important that these young athletes, as they start, as you see the talent early, I mean, you will see the put in place the mental health all the way. And you have to train their parents too, because the parents get so excited. Sometimes they are 10 steps ahead of the child. And so you have to not only work with the child, but you have to work with the parents so they themselves can be able to find the direction in which they can lead that child in a way in which the success can be honed and delivered, as opposed to really, as we say, going to their heads and not performing later on. So the role of mental health personnel, which is, psychologists, is, really, really going to be good support for the development of our athletes in the region.
Well, before we continue this, Olivia Rose wants to say thank you very much for supporting her as an athlete coming up, Mama Grace. To Ashley.
You're welcome, Olivia. But she has been a tremendous thing. She has great ideas about how, and not just in Jamaica, I think in the Caribbean, because part of the things about psychologists, and Gabriel and Ashley can speak to this as well. We need people in the region that understand our people. And when they understand our people, they can then connect with them in a different way. Sometimes we go all over the world to get somebody to come in, but they don't understand the culture of the people, and therefore the impact is a little different. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for that, Mama Grace. Ashley?
Oh, that is so true. I was an exchange student when I was 16, and I've since lived in 6 countries. And it is so important to understand the currency for connection and community wherever you live in order to get the right support. When I was going through my stuff, I had so many people just tell me, get over it. You're too emotionally unstable. They weren't recognizing the needs. So I completely understand that. I think when it comes to athletes specifically, we really need to humanize athletes. Like, if you've got parents and coaches and friends who put this athlete on a pedestal every single day, and they start to believe that that's where they have to perform every single day, and then they get injured and they fall down here, it is really hard to get yourself back up. And it's also, I think it's really important for parents and friends of athletes and coaches to keep those athletes grounded, connected to their core values that were established as they were children, to having friends and some sort of like normalcy in life. One of the things I find that Manchester United does really well is they put kids with host families, and they go to actual school till a certain age. I think it's 14, which still like not the full like K through 12 experience or whatnot, but still enough developmental years to know what it's like to sit in a classroom, interact with kids your own age, talk to teachers, talk to girls, lots of different things that help with just general development that make you a whole person and not just this godlike athlete that the media and a lot of us like to hold athletes to. Additionally, I think there needs to be a lot of trust between athletes and their support systems. So we've had stories in the US about parents who've mismanaged their athletic children who are under the age of 18, and they emancipate themselves to manage their own money. We've got USA Gymnastics in the United States, which screwed up royally on so many counts for 129 young women. So just knowing that you have someone that you can go to, that you can trust, that has your best interest, like an advocate for teams would be huge. Someone that can speak to the athlete and like can be comfortable being that mediator between challenges, or perhaps like an athlete's unwilling to talk to a psychologist, who can they talk to in the interim that might help them get there? Because you can't force anyone to talk to someone about something they don't want to until they're ready. So I think a lot of it comes down to the correct language, avoiding things like you should do this, you need to do this, you must do this. No one wants to be told how to live their life. The trust component, who can people talk to and go to? And then trusting that you've got people that can bring you back down when you're all the way up here, just like living in Zeus land of being an athlete, like the gladiators Gabriel talks about, and staying grounded to who the athlete is at the core and where that foundation is. Because parents can get totally wrapped up in it. My parents thought I was like the greatest swimmer of all time. I was not. So just like having people that can bring you back down to recognize like there is so much more in life than one race, even though it feels like that's the end all be all of the world, that there is always more opportunity no matter what an outcome is, I think is really important for athletes to understand.
Before we take a break, our final break for the show, because we run into extra time, and I want to say thank you very much for the resilience and the support of all our panelists to speak to this important topic. From our audience, this question came in, and I really couldn't ignore it. It is such a brilliant question from Gabriel. What role do you believe social media play in the emotional intelligence and mental health of an athlete? And what can they do to deal with threats to their mental health from social media? And they actually put at Gabriel.
This is a really important question for this day and age. And I've been thinking a lot about it. And the way I created a bit of an analogy of how athletes treat praise and also how they treat criticism and negativity, because there's so much of it coming from so many different directions in social media. And the way I look at it is, if you're standing on stage after a performance, people can do two things. One, they can praise you, say how good you did. And I see that as if they're throwing teddy bears or flowers at you. And the other one is if they start criticizing you, either with facts or just because they want to criticize you and be negative. And that's if they're throwing rotten tomatoes at you. Now, the tricky thing here is a lot of times the rotten tomatoes will stick to you. If you get hit with a rotten tomato, it's going to stick to you. It's going to smell. You need to learn to dodge this or wash it off. Dodging it would be, eliminating your social media, not reading it, deleting the negative ones. washing it off, then there's actually a lot more work on actually being able to read all the negative feedback and things like that. And how do you get rid of it afterwards in your own head so it doesn't stick to you? But then the also tricky thing is think about if somebody's throwing a teddy bear at you, you actually need to catch it. Same thing with flowers. Otherwise, it just bounces off. And it's a very important thing that a lot of time people don't take the time to reflect on the positive praise. They get so stuck on the negative, on the rotten tomato that gets stuck on you, on your clothes, all over you, that once you wash that off, you need to go back to the teddy bears, back to the flowers, grab the teddy bear, feel it, smell the flowers. It's very important to read into the positive praise as well and think more about that than the negative ones. Like I said, you can dodge it, the negative and the rotten tomatoes, you can dodge it, you can wash it off. But don't focus on that. Try focusing more on the positive. It's good to recognize the negative, but don't dwell on it. One thing my father has always told me, and I live to this by this day, is don't waste your time and energy with negative emotions.
Yes.
You need to recognize it, but then grab the positive ones and hold on to that one.
Yes, absolutely.
We got a clap from Mama Grace. What is going on? What is going on here?
No, well
Anybody
said.
else
It's
want to answer that
absolutely
question?
spot on. No,
Correct.
I think that's
Anybody
absolutely
else wants
spot
to
on
answer?
because you the thing about it is that you have a choice in life and you make choices all the time. So here's an opportunity to make a choice. And your choice is to what? Stay with the negative or to choose something that's going to be positive and move you going. So it's important for you to understand you have a choice in life. And so you make the choice, and the choices that you're going to make will be a choice to elevate you, not to let you feel lower than you are. So I think it was an excellent point, Gabriel. I think that is something that I'm actually going to use from now on because it really is very true.
Really amazing. So to our viewers and our panelists, we are going to take a short break as we enter into our extra time, where after the break we're going to speak to suggestions and recommendations to athletes, coaches, support staff, family members, and even national sporting organizations as regards to what they can do to assist when it comes to mental health and emotional intelligence in sport. You're watching Futsal 868 Corner Talks, where global sports professionals meet. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Futsal 868 Corner Talks. I am your
Jerusalem, ikayalami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze.
So welcome back. I'm your host, Geoffrey Edwards, and you're looking at Futsal 868 Corner Talks, where today we speak to mental health and emotional intelligence in sports. We want to say thank you very much to our panelists, who is in Tokyo, Gabriel, in Trinidad Tobago, Mama Grace Jackson, Miss Grace Jackson, and in Colorado, all the way in Colorado, United States of America, Miss Ashley Hughes, and with me is my co-host, Miss Sophia. Sophia, thank you very much for joining us. So in this last segment, we want to speak to suggestions and recommendations. And I want to start off with Gabriel. Please give us your closing thoughts pertaining to suggestions and recommendations to athletes, parents, support staff, coaches, even national sporting organizations when it comes to this topic.
Well, I think the one thing I want to say is confidence is fragile. And it's very important for not only athletes to recognize this, but also administrators and support staff and parents, that confidence is a fragile thing. And one thing that they were talking about before was like the as you call it there, the prima donnas, the very young, talented athletes that are up and coming. They have all this confidence now, but this confidence is fragile because they might be the big athletes in their region, but once they grow out of their region, once they go continental and international, they might not be that big. And that's where that confidence can shatter. So there needs to be a lot of work and support on how to cope with this, on how to adjust your confidence as you move up the different levels. So just a few thoughts to finish off on. The other thing as well that I think is very important in terms of mental health is not everything that you say to yourself is true. So a lot of times you need to evaluate, what am I actually saying to myself? The thoughts that we have in our own heads about ourselves are very powerful, are very strong. But a lot of times what we're saying isn't actually true. So we really need to evaluate what's going on in our heads. And this is where a lot of times going to a professional, even going to a friend sometimes, or support staff, and talking about the way that you feel about yourself and if it's true or not. So it's really important to work on how you speak to yourself. How do you talk to yourself? And be good to yourself. Praise yourself sometimes. Focus more, as we talked about before. Focus more on some of the positive things that are happening. Use the negative ones as feedback, but focus really on the positive ones. And one thing I always say, this is my big message, is adjust. Adapt and adjust. In these days of COVID especially, what are the different ways that you need to adjust to the situation, to adapt to the situation? It's a very difficult time that we're in, but you don't have to accept that we're in it, but you do have to adapt to it.
To Ashley.
Sure. So I think just to kind of add on to what Gabriel talks about in terms of challenging our thoughts, which I'm trained to call cognitive distortions. There's a variety of them. So one of the ways to challenge that is with meditation, and you think of your thoughts as clouds, kind of like the weather. This is a training tactic. And there's a meditation practice where your thought that's negative, just like you let it go by like a cloud, the weather's going to change. Even though the sky is gray, it's actually blue at some point under there. We know that. So challenging your thoughts is super, super important. Is this actually true? Is my perspective there? Also, having friends that you trust to challenge you is really important. I have one friend that will ask constantly, would you like me to be honest or supportive? Supportive meaning I'm going to agree with everything that you say and let you vent, and honest being like, I'm going to ground you for a moment and get you to think differently. So I also think it's really important that we create that whole support system, like how they're educated on noticing signs and symptoms of changes in behavior, being willing and open and talking about that with their athletes. Like, it can be really difficult to approach someone who you can kind of tell is having a hard time, and maybe you feel like that's really not your space, but maybe there's someone who could approach them, and not having that fear of having that discussion, because maybe all they really need is someone to reach out to them because they're not ready to do it themselves. And I think it takes a lot of courage for a coach or even like someone's PT on a team to be like, I've noticed that Grace has been having these different attitudes in practice like the last couple of weeks. Is something going on there? What could we do to support her? Like, having those external conversations is really important, at least from what I've experienced with a lot of the athletes I work with and also myself. And then additionally, like being open to all of the different types of self-care and coping things that exist. So what works for me may not work for Gabriel or Jeffrey. And it's kind of like a self-exploration component. Like for me, I do puzzles when I'm really anxious. It helps me to focus. There's a mindfulness component of just being present. I'm no longer thinking about my big ass to-do list. I'm actually focused on the moment. So like puzzles or journaling or yoga or breath work, it gets a little bit progressive and it can get a little bit like woo-woo. But at the end of the day, if you're able to find things that make you feel better, that help you perform at the level that you want to, then that's great. So for me, I ultimately think it's challenging your thought process, having a support system that's educated on changes in behavior and having a system in place to support that after it's recognized. And then ultimately like being open to things that can benefit your mental health, even if people are like, that's kind of strange. Hey, if it works for you, that's what's most important.
To Mama Grace, thank you very much, Ashley, for your...
Yeah. So I'd like to package what both Gabriel and Ashley just said. So I want to put that in a package because as people, we like to get gifts. Everybody, oh, I'm going to give you a gift. Even if you're getting a pen, wow, I got a gift. And so how can we package what it is that we're saying in the form of a gift? So those who we are trying to connect with, we are able to connect. And so my thought process, and I tend to do this, is why don't we sport connect? And so track connect, cricket connect, basketball connect, whatever it is, connect. And that organization would be made up of not just sports psychologists, but even just counselors generally that will help persons to be able to come and sit down and talk. That would be able to help to deal with athletes' mental and, the state of mind, and, to listen to them talk about the physical, but an opportunity to be able to recommend the things that Gabriel suggested, maybe little things that they can use for survival. And so this is just organizing a group so that, when you want money, you go to the bank, huh? So you go to the bank you say, well, I put some money in the bank and get there. And when you want to buy sporting goods, you go to a sporting goods. So there must be somewhere this thing that can help this group, and how formal you make it really depends on the sport and depends on the country. But something that an athlete knows, they can either take up the phone and call and say, I just want to talk. I'm a little confused. I want to talk. But creating an opportunity, a platform for athletes to connect with, so you can help them on their journey to whatever the success that they desire, even to help them to think of how great they can be in parallel to whatever else they're doing in life. That's my suggestion.
Thank you very much, Mama Grace, for that. We would like to take this opportunity to thank every single member of our panel for taking the time to be with us. To Miss Ashley Hughes, Miss Grace Jackson, and Mr. Gabriel Andrade for your insightful perspective on this powerful yet important topic that is mental health and emotional intelligence. On behalf of the Futsal Association of Trinidad Tobago, Sophia and myself, we want to wish God's richest blessings on your families during this weird and difficult time. Safety to you all as well. And we pray that you will have a fruitful and prosperous week ahead. And most importantly, take care of yourself. Take care of your physical and your mental well-being. So to all, we want to say to our viewers on YouTube and on Facebook, you are watching Futsal868 Corner Talks. We want to say thank you very much. And we want to be able to, those who questions we have not answered, we will definitely try our utmost best to answer it during the course of the week, because we had a lot of questions coming and we couldn't answer it. And we want to say thank you very much for everybody who has been watching us. So to all, do have a blessed and wonderful evening and a great week ahead. Thank you very much and have a good evening. You have been watching.
Thanks to you as well.
Corner Talks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mm.